This is going to be a quick video on how to flash the firmware on your 3D printer using OctoPrint. I'm using an Ender 3 with TH3D software, but it should be similar for similar devices that also use Arduino IDE to compile its firmware. We're going to be using the Firmware Updater plugin found in OctoPrint. Some things to be aware of before following this tutorial. You will need to have flashed a bootloader to your 3D printer already. If you aren't sure what that means, or you know that you haven't done that already, I'll include a link on how to do that for the Ender 3 or the Ender 3 Pro. You will need to have flashed your firmware before using the traditional method in Arduino IDE. This is not a tutorial on how to flash your firmware for the first time, and this method will only work on stock Ender motherboards or silent stepper upgraded motherboards. If you have an SKR Mini or another 32-bit motherboard, the process could be a little bit different for you. If you want to skip ahead in the tutorial, check out the timestamps in the description. If you have a different motherboard other than the stock Ender motherboard, you can check out this link to the plugin's homepage, which will bring you to a GitHub page, and you can check to see if your motherboard is compatible. The first thing we're going to have to do is get the Firmware Updater plugin through OctoPrint. So go ahead and open up your OctoPrint, click the wrench at the top right, find Plugin Manager towards the left side of your screen, click on Get More, and then in the From URL box, you're going to have to copy and paste a link that I'm going to put in the description. This was also on that original page, and then you're going to click Install. Yours might look a little bit different than mine because I already have the plugin installed, so mine's actually going to reinstall it. After that's installed, you can come down here and click Save, and then you can come up here, Reboot System, Proceed. After a few seconds, it'll say Server Offline, then you can just click Refresh until it comes back up. Here you can see it says Server is offline, attempt to reconnect, refresh. If you see this, you just gotta wait another second and then hit refresh and it comes back up here. Just heard my printer reboot. Go ahead, just keep refreshing until it looks normal again. Okay, so now OctoPrint's back up and you have the plugin installed. After OctoPrint reboots, you can come up here to the Settings wrench, and you should see Firmware Updater down here underneath your Plugins tab. If you don't see it down here somewhere, then something went wrong with the installation and you need to try to reinstall it. When we click on the settings for Firmware Updater, we see that there's a path to avrdude that I have entered in here. Yours will be the same, but before you enter it in now, we're actually going to have to install that into OctoPrint. We're going to have to do this by SSHing into OctoPrint or your Raspberry Pi. So in order to SSH into OctoPrint, we're actually going to have the IP address for our Raspberry Pi. You can see that mine's up here in the URL because I set mine to a static IP in my router settings. If you are not sure what your IP address is for your Raspberry Pi and you have a dynamic IP address, which means you might have something up here like local Raspberry Pi or local.octoprint, then I'll show you how to find your IP address. Come down to the bottom left for the Start button, search for Command Prompt, click on it when it pops up. Now we're going to want to type in the following command. Ping space octopi.local. This will also be in the description along with all of the other commands that we're going to enter in. Go ahead and click enter. As you can see, some information is coming back. This is going to be your MAC address for your Raspberry Pi. So select all of that, except for that last character. You don't want to grab that last character. Then click Control C to copy it. Come down here, we're going to enter in another command. And then here we can paste in what we copied above. So that's going to be SSH space pi at, and then paste in the MAC address that you copied above and click enter. Now it's going to ask you for a password. If you haven't changed your password before, it's just going to be raspberry. RASPBERRY. You won't be able to see yourself type it in, and then click enter. You can see some information about your Raspberry Pi here. This is my IP address assigned to my Raspberry Pi by my router. If you knew that from before, you could have typed that last command in with the IP address instead of the MAC address. Now we're going to want to run the following commands. That's sudo space apt-get space update. Then click enter. Again, it's going to ask you for the password. It's going to be the same password, raspberry. Type it in, click enter. Mine's going to go pretty quick. Yours might take a little while longer, especially if you have never done this before. Our next command, sudo space apt-get space upgrade. Click enter. Again, yours is probably going to take a lot longer than mine. We see that it's finished. Now we're going to enter our final command. Sudo space apt-get space install space avrdude. I'm not actually going to click enter on it since I already have this installed and I'm not sure if it automatically reinstalls. But go ahead and click enter on yours. It should take you through the installation process. I don't believe you'll have to answer yes to anything, but if it asks you yes or no, just click yes, and you should be all set with installing this. After you run that last command and you install the avrdude, go ahead and just type exit. Then you're done with this part. So getting into the next part of the tutorial, I have here the root folder of my firmware folder. So you can see I have th3d firmware. This is currently what's on my printer. I have it saved onto my computer so I can modify it later in the future. You might not have yours saved. You might have to go download a fresh Marlin firmware file or th3d, whatever firmware you're using. You might have to go and get that. If you have it saved on your computer and you know where it's at, that's great. We can come back to it. And then yours will probably be similar to this, where you have a .bat you have to open to actually get to the firmware. So I double click on that. It's going to launch the Arduino IDE. You can see I have th3d, and then you have all of your different tabs where you modified different stuff before, and you're going to want to make sure that you have your board selected and a processor selected from however you programmed your motherboard before, and then you're going to want to come here to verify and just make sure that the sketch compiles successfully. If it doesn't, there'll be output here saying what's wrong. You might have messed up somewhere in the code. You might have to change something. You need to figure that out, and you need to make sure it compiles successfully before we actually do anything else with it. So you can see that mine is done compiling. It compiled successfully. There's no errors. Once you get to this point, you're going to want to come up to Sketch, and you're going to want to select Export Compiled Binary. When you click that, it's going to export a hex file, and if we go back to our original firmware folder that I just showed you a second ago, this is the root folder for it. See, we're just back in the th3d folder. We're going to go into Firmware. This folder could be different for you, could be similar. Go in here. This is all of your different tabs in file form. And if you go in here, you can search .hex. And we see that we have a few different hex files in here now, which means that you successfully completed the earlier part of this. If you don't see any .hex files in here, specifically one that looks like this one, not the bootloader, but this one, then you're going to want to go back and repeat the earlier part of the process and verify again that you don't have any errors down here. After this, you can click the X to X out of our search, and then you're going to want to remember the location that this is stored at and keep this file explorer open. So here we are back in our OctoPrint. The next thing we're going to want to do is go back to this wrench and then click on Firmware Updater. From here, we're going to want to click on this settings wrench up here. Now you're going to want to verify your settings here. You're going to want to be using the avrdude here. This is what I needed to have selected as my processor on my Arduino IDE. Yours is probably going to be similar if you have the earlier motherboards that I mentioned. And then in the path to avrdude, you're going to want to enter this in exactly as I have it, and you're going to click the test button. And you're going to want to see that it says the path is valid. If it does not say the path is valid, this is not going to work for you. You could try to reboot OctoPrint. You could try to completely reinstall the avrdude back into your Raspberry Pi from the earlier process. Just try to restart a couple things, try it over, and try to get back to this point. And then for AVR programmer type, you just want to select Arduino and then click Save. From here, verify your serial port. I only had one option. You probably only have one option as well. And then from here, you want to click on Browse in the From File section. So now you're going to want to locate your firmware folder again that I told you to save the location of. Just to remind you, this again, you're going to want to locate this. So this is where I have mine saved. Again, I'm going to go into Firmware, TH3D, and then you're going to see that it only shows you a couple hex options. You might have a couple more hex options, but you're going to want to find one that looks similar to this. You want to click on that. You can click Open. You're going to see now that it has it up here. If it gives you any kind of error, you've selected the wrong file or you did something wrong earlier. From here, we can just click Flash from File. See it's starting to flash. I'm going to pause my video here and resume when it's done. You can see now that it says flashing successful at the top right. I just heard my printer reboot. We're going to want to go ahead and just click Save here. We're going to want to come here and just completely reboot system. After a couple seconds, it's going to either say server is offline. You might have to come up here and hit refresh. Either way, it's easy to just hit refresh. This just means you refreshed too early, so just refresh again. Keep refreshing until the OctoPrint page comes back up. That just means your Raspberry Pi is back up. You can see that this last refresh I did was successful. My Raspberry Pi is back up. And again, this is just going to be the URL that you use to normally connect to OctoPrint. So on your screen, you might see some errors. I did the first time I did this. I said something along the lines of printer not connecting due to EEPROM data size error. It said that right in here. I wasn't able to control my printer at all. Couldn't change the temperatures. Couldn't do anything. Couldn't come into the control tab. So to fix that, you're going to want to come into the settings. Then you're going to want to click on behavior. And yours is probably going to be selected on disconnect from the printer. You're going to want to change that to cancel any ongoing prints. Go ahead and just verify that's what you selected. Go ahead and click save down here. So now you're going to want to go up to your terminal here. You're going to want to do two commands. So the first one's going to be an M502. That's just going to reset your EEPROM. And after a second or two, it'll receive that. And then you're going to want to do an M500, which is going to save the EEPROM. Now you're going to want to come up here, reboot system. Are you sure? Proceed. Same process as before. It's going to tell us server offline. We're going to come up here and click refresh. Wait for our Raspberry Pi to boot back up. Refresh again. Wait another second. So now that I have it loaded back up, you should have no errors here again. It shouldn't say anything about your EEPROM data size error. You might have to click connect if you're not automatically connecting. So now you should be all set. You should have your new firmware flashed to your printer. You should be able to control all of the settings. You should have no errors in here. It should be just like before. You know, everything should be back the way it was before, except for you have new firmware on your printer. And to repeat this process, you can just do exactly what I did the last half of the video. You don't have to reinstall avrdude and Raspberry Pi again. You just have to go make the changes in your Arduino IDE, save them, compile them, and then you're going to want to write the new hex file again like we did. And then you're just going to come back into your plugin manager, your firmware updater, and just repeat this process again. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this cleared up some confusion about using this plugin. It was really hard to find information about it, at least for the Ender 3. There's a couple other videos out there, but they don't really explain every step, and especially they don't explain the part about installing the avrdude part into your Raspberry Pi. If you have any questions or any errors that I didn't cover, please just leave a comment below. This was basically my first ever YouTube video. I just made this because of the lack of information, so if you do have any feedback, please also let me know that in the comments.